Glad you're here. Welcome. We're going to go ahead and run through our lesson for Mark chapter 2, all right? I hope things went well today, but you'll have to probably get some people caught up next week when the crowd's back. So you might want to just review a little bit related to the story of John Mark. And next week is the familiar story. I love the fact that Mark just jumps right into the life of Jesus. There's very little about his background. It's just when Jesus begins his earthly ministry, that's where Mark picks up the story. So in Mark chapter 2, it's the story of the paralytic, where his friends bring him to receive healing from Jesus. And they had faith if they could just get him to Jesus, he would be healed, all right? But the real issue is that Jesus deals with the man's sin and forgives him of his sin, which gets all kinds of reaction from the religious people. And so we talked a little bit about the idea of forgiveness and the fact that to be forgiven is really like a fresh start. And even if you want to use the example I gave you there of planting a garden in the spring, that's an idea of fresh start. But there's really kind of comparisons there between somebody who has a clean conscience and is now forgiven of their sin, and it's a fresh start for them. And so if you want to use that as an introduction, attention getter, that's fine, or you can use your own. But a big idea that we're going to try to touch base on is that Jesus has the authority to forgive sins. That's a big takeaway from this lesson that you're going to be teaching. All right. So as Jesus launches into this public ministry, the text tells us that he's in what city?
Capernaum.
Yes, he's in Capernaum. Next week when you guys are teaching this lesson, I will be in Capernaum. I will be on the Sea of Galilee, taking our boat ride and going to Capernaum. So you don't have to mention that, but I will. What's interesting about the city of Capernaum, one of the main personalities that's from that city was the prophet Nahum. In fact, I even included that the city has an identity with Nahum, and it's actually, in the Hebrew, the Old Testament pronunciation of the city was Kafar Nahum. It's the city of Nahum. All right? But the city's going to be eclipsed by somebody more important than Nahum coming on the scene. And who are a couple personalities that are going to put Capernaum on the map?
Jesus.
Jesus is always the right answer.
Peter.
Yes, Simon Peter. This is the home of Simon Peter. Now, he was in Bethsaida, the fisher town. That's where he was raised. But he ends up living in Capernaum, because when Jesus is in Capernaum, most of the time he's at the house of Simon Peter. The first thought, though, is the idea of faith expressed. And really, at first, it's the beginning of the faith of the four friends. We really don't know much about the faith of the paralytic. I mean, maybe he was all on board with the idea of them taking him to see Jesus. But he was all on board.
Yeah, and he couldn't say much about it. They were carrying him.
But the truth of the matter is, these guys took action. And really, faith is defined that way, isn't it? Faith is not just a state of mind. It's always reflected in action. And so it's something we do. It's not something we just possess. And so in the case of these four men, it was their faith put into action as they get their friends trying to reach Jesus. And they ran into obstacles, and what did they do with those obstacles?
Took them out of the way.
They removed them, right? I mean, the press was so much, there were so many people that wanted to see Jesus that they couldn't get to him, especially carrying this bed with this man on it. And so, it was showing some ingenuity. They go up on top of the flat roof of this home and proceed to pull up what would have been the ceiling, and no doubt there was dust and debris falling down. They could not have done this without there being some pretty significant attention from the people in the room, wondering what in the world is going on. They dug a hole or pulled a hole apart big enough to lay this guy down, let him down with 4 ropes on the corners of his bed, and Jesus was impressed with the compassion of these men and their faith, and that's what initiates further, okay?
Ray, wouldn't you say this is kind of a doctrinal, a theological anomaly where one person's faith caused somebody else to get...
That's interesting. I don't know that I'd ever thought of it that way, but it actually is...
Usually it's the guy, your own faith that gets you saved.
It is, and certainly it would still have been the man's own faith that it took for salvation,
Ultimately, yeah.
but it was ultimately the 4 men's faith that showed the action enough to try to get it to Jesus. I imagine if we thought it through, there might be some other examples where people were certainly showing great faith trying to get help for their friends, but you know, another topic for another time, maybe. Anyway, go ahead.
The centurion.
That's the one I thought of too.
That's what I thought of.
Yeah, right away. The centurion and his servant. It was the centurion's faith.
Yeah, Jairus.
Yeah, Jairus' daughter. Exactly. There's a couple of other examples. But that is interesting, Jim. So, you know, I asked the question, what did it cost the men to bring their friend to Jesus? Well, again, they had to take time. They had to believe themselves that Jesus had the authority to do this. And it was certainly motivated by love for their friend. And so that's all part of this expression of their faith. All right, well, what happened was once they get this man to Jesus and Jesus stops to address it, there's the question of authority. Because what was it that Jesus did? Well, first of all, let me ask the question that I asked in the notes. Why do you suppose the scribes assumed Jesus lacked authority?
Because they had authority.
It's true.
And he wasn't learned.
Okay?
He didn't go to all the
One of them.
Proper schools.
Seminaries.
Yeah.
There we go.
Who's he a part of? What's his group that gives him identity and authority? That's all accurate.
Yes.
But Jesus had come on the scene so quickly, they knew nothing about his pedigree, nothing about his education. Was he from the school of Shammai or the school of Hillel? They didn't know. Did he go to Baptist Bible College? Yes. But they questioned his authority. But now all of a sudden in this instance, there's a real question of his authority, right? And so I mentioned the question there, how is sin like paralysis? The man's a paralytic, he's paralyzed, and how can we move beyond our sin to take the fresh start Jesus gives us? Well, part of that parallel that I infer is that, you know, sin and the fear of sin and the consequences, guilt, those things are paralyzing sometimes. And so when we, like paralysis, sin can be immobilizing for some people. And what they need is forgiveness. Well, that's what Jesus deals with in this story. How is it that Jesus approaches the idea of healing the man that's the paralytic with the forgiveness issue? What happened?
We're talking about forgiving sin. Your sins are forgiven.
Yes. In the story, Jesus said, your sins are forgiven. Take up your bed and walk. Right? Well, immediately there was a reaction on the part of the religious people. And what was their reaction?
You can't forgive sin.
Only God can forgive sins. Well, little did they know they were in the presence of God. And but under the power there, the power proclaimed in verses 8 to 11, Jesus demonstrates his power. He also demonstrates his authority in the way he approaches this particular healing. because he knew what they were thinking. I mean, the text is very clear. They said, in their hearts, they said, who does he think he is? Only God can forgive sins. Well, Jesus knew what was in their hearts. And so he did. I like that, Jim. He set them up because now follow along with this reasoning, and you may have already done this, but in verse 9, Jesus asked pointedly, which is easier? What did he say? What did he ask them? Knowing what was in their heart, what did he ask them? What was easier?
Forgiving sins or healing somebody.
Okay? What is easier? To say your sins be forgiven you, or to say, rise, take up your bed and walk.
It's easier to say your sins are forgiven because nobody can see.
That's exactly the point. Exactly the point. Most people would say, oh, well, it's the easier thing to do is to tell him to take up his bed and walk. No, it's not.
You have to do it.
You do. And so the test is right in front of everybody on whether he'll do that. Somebody could say, your sins are forgiven you. Nobody knows if that's true or not, right? But Jesus pointedly says to them, because he knows what's in their heart, what's easier to do? To say, your sins are forgiven you, or to take up your bed and walk? And then it says specifically, he turns to the paralytic, and he says, rise, take up your bed and walk. Well, again, now this is going to immediately result in a miracle or a bust. I mean, his authority's been questioned. Now he is going to do something that only God can do. They had said, only God has the right to forgive sins. Well, Jesus was acting as God in this case. He was God. They just didn't realize it. But he gives example of his power and authority by telling the man to get up and walk. All right? So then I just kind of, to bring that up to a close in that point.
Ray,
Yes.
chronologically, was this his first healing, public healing?
It is in Mark.
Yeah, he did.
The first miracle was turning the water into wine at Cana. I'm not even sure what. In chapter 1, that's where he's healing Peter's mother-in-law.
Right, that is first.
Yeah, and I'm thinking too that he's already been going about healing people without any specificity. So this is clearly the first major miracle that's developed and explained.
Her mother-in-law wasn't public, it was in her
No,
house.
that's true. But she immediately got up and started serving, didn't she?
He'd already done the miracle, the catch of fish, from John 5.
Because John 5 is before the paralytic in John's gospel. Yeah, so there, if you're thinking chronologically, there probably are a couple other things.
Okay.
But you might probe with your group, what did the man think when this happened? What did his friends think? What did these other people who were critical think? And so all of those issues can be raised. And then the final authority, the final topic is authority demonstrated. And again, Jesus shows his awesome power by actually allowing the fulfillment of telling this man to get up and walk. And everyone that witnessed it, even the religious people, the implication is, because the latter part of the text says they were all astonished. They had never seen anything like this, right? And so clearly, even though they're questioning the authority of Jesus, he is demonstrating he has authority. And it's not from anybody. The authority Jesus is demonstrating is the authority from God. All right? And so I think you shut him up for a couple of days. But I do think you'll have a good time with this lesson. There's a lot of good things there to develop.